The Yemeni government lays down its terms for a ceasefire with rebels in the north. But with unrest now on several fronts, does the government need to think about terms for its future survival? And what's the fallout of a breakdown on an already volatile region? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Sami Zaidan. On Thursday, Yemen's government announced its conditions for a truce with the rebels fighting in the country's north. These included a rebel withdrawal, the removal of their checkpoints, and clarification on the fate of kidnapped foreigners. Well, in addition, the rebels have been asked to refrain from intervening in local authority affairs. Well, at least 15 people have reportedly been killed since Wednesday. That's when army troops launched an offensive in the rebels' stronghold Sadaa province. The government sent in fighter planes and even tanks. Independent of what's going on in the north, separatists are fighting for an autonomous south. And what's going on in Yemen has implications for others in the region. Saudi Arabia shares a border with Yemen and is very close to the area of conflict in the north. And Somalia, as well as all its upheavals, is just across the Gulf of Aden in the south. Well, getting pictures out of the region is extremely difficult. But here's a report by Owen Fay on Yemen and its multiple challenges.
Scenes like this are what President Saleh means when he says his military will strike rebel strongholds with an iron fist. Fighter jets and helicopters targeting what they believe to be the headquarters of the rebel forces in Sadaa province. But support for this campaign is far from universal and is complicated by the fact that many tribal groups being counted on for support have so far been reluctant to take the president's side against the rebels. But the government insists this must happen.
The state has the right to enforce security and stability in Saada. It has the obligation to protect citizens from any destructive or terrorist actions. The citizens are being terrorized. There are murderous actions going on. The state has the obligation to protect citizens even if it has to resort to military force.
This offensive is the latest military action to take place in fighting which has gone on for the past 4 years. The rebels, Shia belonging to the Zaidi branch, oppose what they see as undue government cooperation with the United States and have vowed to fight on. The president says troops will remain here until the rebels surrender once and for all. But in an interview with Al Jazeera just last week, a leading politician belonging to one of the country's most powerful tribes launched a scathing attack on the leadership.
I call upon the president to put the benefits of Yemen ahead of his own personal interests. And in my view, I believe the best way this can be done, and the only way we can rescue ourselves from the problems that we face, is by the president resigning from office.
And even as the government struggles to bring the region under control, images like these are becoming ever more commonplace. In southern Yemen, protests have been growing in strength and anti-government sentiment is plainly evident. This region has only been fully integrated with the rest of the country for less than 2 decades, and separatists here reject the government in Sana'a, declaring it illegitimate. And if that weren't enough for the government to contend with, in the past several years the country has also seen a resurgence of groups affiliated with al-Qaeda who have been carrying out attacks with ever greater frequency. Just last month, 6 of these defendants were given the death sentence for their role in the killing of 9 Spanish and Belgian tourists over the course of the past 2 years. The attacks, said experts, bore the hallmarks of conventional al-Qaeda operations. 10 other defendants were sentenced to jail terms ranging from 8 to 15 years. In addition, the group is being blamed for a string of attacks in recent months, which include a suicide attack on the U.S. Embassy, which left 16 dead. And yet, even in and among these various crises besieging the government, Yemenis were able to pause and find some common ground as they celebrated the return of a revered cleric at last freed from prison in the United States. Sheikh Mohammed al-Moyad and an aide were released from American custody after a lengthy campaign on his behalf. After spending years behind bars, a U.S. appeals judge overturned the verdict against the 2 men and ordered their immediate release. A rare and fleeting moment of relief for a country under assault from so many sides. Owen Fay, Al Jazeera.
Well, let's welcome our guests into the show now. In Sana'a, Mohammed Al-Qadi, he's a foreign correspondent for Abu Dhabi's newspaper, The National. And in Leeds, England, Mahmoud Al-Azzani, he's an analyst on Yemeni affairs and a lecturer at Sheffield's Hadfield Institute. Thanks so much for joining us, gentlemen. If I could start with Mohammed Al-Qadi. Is the fight against the rebels in the north of the country simply a fight against terrorism, as the government likes to frame it, or is it a continuation of that struggle that toppled the Shiite Zaidi Imam in 1962?
I don't think that the fight is a fight against terrorism, as the government usually says, but you know, it's a fight between the government and these rebels, which has political dimension. It's also, in my point of view, a manifestation and the consequences for the manipulation of religion in political disputes. As we know that the regime of President Saleh
Sorry, when you say manipulation of religion, who are you blaming here? The rebels or the government for manipulating religion?
It's the government that has been manipulating religion and religious disputes for its political interests. You know, we all know that the government has been behind the establishment of al-Houthis and has supported their leader Hussein al-Houthi, who was killed in the first round of this fight in 2004. He was supported by the government just to stand against the Salafists and also the Muslim brotherhoods. So because the Zaydis in Sadaa, they have been complaining to President Saleh that Salafism is conquering Sadaa, which is a stronghold for the Zaydi sect. In this way, I mean, in the beginning, it's the government that has been supporting al-Houthis and has been manipulating them just for its political
But counter-allegations can be made, can't it? That some of the heads of the security agencies, it's alleged, are Salafists. So it doesn't really depend on which side of the political fence you sit on.
Now, as we know now, after 5 years of fighting, there has been so many complications in this fight between the government and the rebels. It has been involving different actors like tribesmen, warmongers, drugs traffickers there in Saada, who have been all, I mean, also tribesmen. There are tribesmen who are supporting al-Houthis, and there are tribesmen who are supporting the government along with the Salafis. So it has grown so sophisticated to the extent that it has been uncontrollable by the government. Now it is involving different actors from the local community, as well as it has also regional dimensions. It has
I'm going to jump in here if I could. Sorry, Al-Qadi, if we could try and get to the regional dimensions later, but I want to pick up a point with Mr. Al-Azzani in Leeds and ask the question, how much are economic factors, economic marginalization of some of the tribes in the north, how much of that is a factor that's fueling the troubles in the north of the country?
Yes, thank you, Sami. I think the whole development of the situation could be originally attributed to the failure of development in this area. For so many years after the revolution, I mean, Saada used to become underdeveloped, and there was no serious attempt to take the issue further by the government. So if I can just summarize, because actually my honorable friend from Sana'a, he shed the light in the political dimension of the issue only. I share that understanding with him, and I agree with what he said.
But you think it's not entirely political, it's also an economic problem?
I could attribute the whole issue into three sets of failures on the side of the government, and I could add one set of failure to the side of Houthis. For the government, the three sets of failures are, first, failure of government to take the issue of underdevelopment seriously, and the second is failure of the government to engage and represent all citizens or give them the chance to equal and fair representation through the democratic process. And the third set of failure, which was mentioned by my friend from Sana'a, which the way that the government used to manage the internal conflict through support the enemy of my enemy, or divide and rule. I mean, this is the way that the al-Shabab al-Mu'min was created earlier, or al-Houthi,
right,
is to hinder the development and the growth of Salafism in Sadaa. And now they have grown up, they grow big, and they have their ambitions for influence, and they are a problem now for the government. But one point I want to add, I said 3 sets of failure on the side of the government and 1 set of failure on the side of the rebel groups. They fail as well to make themselves part of the political mainstream politics of Yemen, and that's on their side. But the main blame to put, if we discuss the blame game, the government is the responsible body for managing the situation. It has the power to decide war and peace. It has the power and the mandate to undertake the development seriously.
Right.
And the accumulation of these failures throughout the years have resulted in today's situation.
All right, Mr. Mohammed Al-Qadi, do you think there's some element of truth to that? The failure, particularly in distributing power and privilege fairly in Yemen. Some would argue that certain tribes dominate the country. The president's Sanhan tribe dominates the security forces. Is that part of the problem?
This is absolutely, I mean, true, and I do agree with Mr. Al-Azawi or what he said, that it has also an economic factor. But this is also the feeling of marginalization everywhere, not only in Saada. Because, you know, if we look into these Al-Houthis and these Zaidis, they have been overthrown. I mean, as a Hashemite family that have been thrown in the revolution in 1962 in the north. And there have been a lot of complaints and a lot of criticism for this family, that they are all behind all the trouble that we are going through. I mean, this sense of defeat among these people has found its way in Al-Houthis rebellion, and there has been a lot of sympathy from those people with Al-Houthis, and there is also a sense of marginalization in the south, as we have seen. There have been a lot of protests, I mean, throughout the last few years, and now we have reached the point in which the people in the south have been calling for separation and independence again.
That's interesting, Mohammed, that you mentioned the situation in the south. Is it also in the south, is it a case of people who want to break away, as it's sometimes seen, or is that again a struggle for better, fairer distribution of the country's resources, fairer distribution of, let's face it, oil revenue, especially when many of the oil fields are in the south?
I don't think, you know, that these people were very serious about breaking away from, because, you know, the people in the south, the people who have been protesting these days, are the same people who have been carrying, I mean, the car of President Saleh in 1990 when the unity was announced there in Eden. So it's a sense of marginalization. It's also an accumulation of different economic factors fueled by corruption. There have been a lot of reports by the government itself. They set up a committee in which the ministers who were heading this committee, they recommended that 15 corrupt crooks or officials and the military, as well as civil servants and others, influential tribespeople, should be ousted if President Saleh wants to maintain unity. This report has been released in 2007, right. And so far there has been nothing.
Okay, it's interesting. I want to pick up on the point there you mentioned of corruption. Looking at Transparency International's 2008 Corruption Perception Index, Yemen now ranks at 141st place. That's out of only 180 countries, and that compares to 111th place in 2006. So, Mahmoud Al-Azani, sounds like there are a bunch of economic issues at play here. Rapid population growth, dwindling water and oil resources, poverty, corruption, unemployment. The list is quite long. It seems like the factors are converging. Is Yemen heading for a breakdown?
I hope not.
Well, what do you think,
I
rather
hope
than what you
not.
hope?
Yeah, I think it is serious. It's very serious now, and I don't dare to say that Yemen is heading to the breakdown. But if there is no serious attempt now to admit this causes a failure and start another political process which will engage everyone in Yemen, all political parties, all these conflicting sides, in a serious dialogue. So the way that Yemen used to be managed in the past cannot work anymore.
So what you're saying, in other words, is the democracy in Yemen is just a veneer?
Sorry, can't hear you.
Would you agree with those who say that the democratic process in Yemen is just skin deep, that really the government or the president has used the country's resources to buy off the opposition rather than creating a very vibrant political process?
Well, country resources are used to recreate or reproduce the current state of affairs. It's used, I mean, the whole democratic process has lost its purpose now, because in a way, the way it is managed and manipulated using government resources, using influence, using different kind of corruption to manipulate the outcome of any election, have made the political process or the current democracy purposeless.
Right.
It doesn't work this way.
All right, Mohammed Al-Qadi, you wanted to talk earlier about regional factors, and I interrupted you, so let's talk about them now. Well, in turn, if Yemen is heading to a very bleak scenario in future, some say that would ultimately create a sort of huge lawless zone stretching from Kenya to Saudi Arabia. Is that how you see the future?
You know, I mean, if I strike a point that has been mentioned by Al-Azawi, that I think, you know, the government, both the government and Al-Houthis have been fighting a futile and fruitless battle. And they have, you know, throughout the years, they have not been able to defeat each other. No one was able to defeat each other, and they have now to sit down and talk.
Right, but if we broaden out the discussion a little bit, Mr. Al-Qadi, it's not only the Houthis that are allegedly operating in Yemen, Al-Qaeda fighters.
I know.
What's the possibility of Yemen becoming this big haven for disaffected armed people to destabilize the rest of the region?
It's a bunch of problems. I know that al-Qaeda there, and also the South unrest, and this has been also a concern, I mean, for the international community and also for the region, particularly for the Saudi Arabia, because, you know, Sadaa is on the border of this Saudi Arabia, and fighting has reached places on the border, and there have been reports also that Al-Houthis has been able to control areas on the borders, and the army has been trying to go into the Saudi land and try to recontrol these areas. So it has reached a very serious point, I mean, which is making the Saudis worried about the situation. And I think, I mean, there has to be also some kind of pressure from the international community. The international community has been silent throughout the years on what is going on Sadaa. Now Sadaa has become a swamp for it can be a stronghold for a lot of problems that can cause a lot of problems to the Saudi Arabia and other not only the Saudis but also for the international community at large, because now the Saudis, the Houthis have been also trying to capture areas, or we have some reports that they have bought big chunks of lands in an island which is called Medi, which is overlooking the Red Sea. This is a very serious development in the fighting between the two sides.
All right. Mahmoud Al-Azzani, as operating conditions become more and more difficult for Al-Qaeda in places like Iraq and Saudi Arabia, are they moving to Yemen?
I think Al-Qaeda always find it easier to operate where political and economic failure exists. And we remember the situation in Iraq, after the invasion and the situation of no state, have paved the way for al-Qaeda to operate and to gain the upper hand throughout the whole country. And
could a similar thing happen in Yemen?
In Iraq, and these consequences. The Yemen, if the failure, if the region, if the internal representative, if the internal side, for example, the government, the opposition parties, the rebels, the representative of the South movement, don't engage in a serious talk and dialogue to find out peaceful solution to all problems in one. If the regional government ignore the situation of Yemen, if the international community ignore the situation of Yemen, the outcome that you're going to have another operating ground for the al-Qaeda and other kind of deadly situations. There is still chance if there is a degree of honesty and commitment to resolve the situation. But I think the start and the responsibility comes from the government. It is time to act, and it is time to think with sense of responsibility. And they should put aside the quest for maintaining power forever. They should put aside the quest to marginalize all different sects of the society and regions.
Right.
They should create a state that will represent all Yemenis. We should work to create a platform for representation and sharing the wealth and power between all citizens equally.
Okay.
This issue is a serious one.
Let me jump in
and
here
we've
with
reached the critical point of it.
A final brief point. Mohammed Al-Qadi, we've been talking a lot about local factors in Yemen impacting the region as a whole. What about the other way around? Are regional powers, Saudi Arabia, Iran, also playing out the situation inside Yemen for their advantage?
I think, it's also the responsibility of the government from the beginning. I'm not here to blame the government for everything. And al-Houthis are also to be blamed because in this the fifth round of fighting, they have shrugged their shoulders and they show that they are more powerful than the government, and they have started controlling so many areas. So the two sides are to be blamed. But at the same time, there are regional factors that have been contributing, and this is the responsibility of the government in the first hand, because it has allowed the situation to grow loose and more complicated, so that there are some international or regional forces are putting their nose in this affair in Sadaa. There have been a lot of accusations for Iran, by the government itself, and for Libya of supporting al-Houthis. And al-Houthis also, they have been complaining that the Saudis are standing against them and they are supporting the government. We don't have concrete evidences on this, but in my point of view, the Saudis are very concerned about the situation there, and they are concerned of the growing of al-Houthis as a strong, as powerful group on their borders, as they can be manipulated by Iran as Hezbollah is in Lebanon. So, and
right.
they have their concerns about the situation.
So there's a lot at stake for a lot of people in the region. But now we're going to have to thank our guests, Mohammed Al-Qadi from the national newspaper in Abu Dhabi, and Mahmoud Al-Azzani from the Hatfield Institute in Leeds. And thank you so much for joining us here on this edition of Inside Story. As always, we welcome your comments and suggestions. Email them to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. But now it's goodbye.